Tell me, how does she seem to you? Perfectly horrid. And her...
Down with the bloody big head being the Red Queen.
Down with bloody big head! What a regrettably large head you have.
Down with the bloody big head being the Red Queen.
Bloody big head. Down with bloody big head.
Fuck you, Tim Burton. Adapting Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland has always been a bit of a touchy subject, not an easy venture for even the most experienced of creative teams. Indeed, even its most famous depiction, 1951's Disney edition, was criticised for the studio penchant for Disneyfication, a sort of narrative manicuring most of their adaptations went through, which saw the rough edges and less child-friendly imagery shaved away in favour of more colourful, approachable, easy-to-understand family fare. Now, to be fair to Disney, it's not a tradition they invented. The Brothers Grimm, despite their name and reputation, were famous for collecting up various scattered peasant fables and turning them into coherent, easily consumed moral tales. That said, if they set the standard, Disney turned it up to 11, and thus we get Snow White, except they don't torture the witch to death, Cinderella, except Cinderella doesn't break her stepmother's neck in a fit of rage, and Hercules, except his dad doesn't turn into animals and trick people into having sex. As more cynical critics put it, a shameless process by which everything the studio touched, no matter how unique the vision of the original from which the studio worked, was reduced to the limited terms Disney and his people could understand. Carroll's tale, a story of a young girl finding her way in a strange and distorted reality, is about as unique a vision as you can get, and even before its eventual film adaptation, it was pretty clear how Walt & Company were going to handle it. By 1930, Disney had produced 57 Alice in Cartoonland shorts based on the original novels, and when I say based, I mean very, very loosely. The only real connection here is that Alice is a little girl in a weird cartoony fantasy setting, with little of the recognisable narrative, characters, or elements of Wonderland that made the original work where it was. As a direct result of the popularity of these shorts, Disney eventually got the go-ahead for a feature-length adaptation and, much like with the shorts, made sure to pick and choose what aspects of the text they wanted to make use of. This is, what an adaptation is after all. A book is obviously not a film, and to adapt one into the other is going to require significant retooling just by the nature that now everything is visual and goes by way faster. We're also living in the hellscape of capitalism, so of course everything needs to be predictively rejiggered to make sure it appeals to the vague notion of an established audience. So woo! Now instead of the Griffin and the Mock Turtle, we get Tweedledee and Tweedledum, because look at these silly little guys. One of the more fundamental changes here was structural. As with the Brothers Grimm, an effort to turn the story into something easier to process and understand. Carroll's novel was, by design, an attempt to depict an arbitrary and confusing world as observed through the eyes of a child. But Disney couldn't rightly be expected to do an hour and change of just weird stuff happening and then the story ends. So it became a moral fable, a be careful what you wish for story, which teaches Alice the horrific dangers of daring to dream of something more. You'll learn about these laws, Alice, and then you'll get married and locked in an attic. Aesthetic concessions were also made. The illustrations associated to the novel had already become pre-recognisable to the wider public, but the kind of detail given to the characters and surroundings just wasn't feasible for a mid-budget animated production. Thus, we got simple, colourful characters, albeit not ones that really resembled anything audiences thought of at the time as Alice. I'll give the film credit, despite significant changes, it still far more closely resembles the novel than the prior shorts, and it's hard to deny it's not an entertaining watch with a lot of memorable moments and characters. Bear in mind, this is credit even Walt Disney wouldn't give the movie. Rumour goes that he'd chastise anyone who dared even bring up the name of the film around him, such was his disappointment with how it turned out. Other non-Disney adaptations of the novel would come out both before and after that version. We had 1933's Norman McLeod version with its all-star cast and Hollywood budget, which also failed to impress many people, and the 1972 version, which
Would not join the dance. Would not join the dance.
So there we have it. Turns out adapting material is hard, especially material that was literally intended to be weird and confusing on purpose. To do so usually requires you attempt to figure out the elements that are important, the elements that aren't, and work out both what audiences might expect to see, and then what they'd really enjoy. Does this sound like an advanced concession to Tim Burton's version? Does it sound like I'm preemptively forgiving the work for some of the missteps in handling the material? Oh, don't you worry, kids. Don't you worry. Because I'm not here to tell you Tim Burton was given difficult material and did the best he could. I'm not here to say that the movie just isn't that great. I'm here to explain how Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland attempts to honour, reinvent, and introduce new feminist and progressive ideas of a modern Alice story. And fails, utterly, in nearly every single way. Flaws in any creative work are, for the most part, subjective. If, I don't know, a movie is supposed to be set in ancient Rome, but then there's a shot where you can see Russell Crowe is wearing lycra shorts, sure, you can call that a definitive objective flaw, probably. But, as another example, to call a muted colour palette dull as a flaw sort of misses the point if that aesthetic choice was a very deliberate way to evoke a certain tone. Similarly, I don't think just pointing out the ways that Tim Burton's version is different from the original in and of itself is criticism of the work, so while I will mention changes throughout, I'm not gonna cinema sins ding it every time there's a thing that's different.
No joke, straight up, how the f*** is this fish moving like this?
I wonder. So yeah, I'll summarise here, but rest assured, I'm not going to hate on Burton just for making changes. Okay? Okay.
Do you think I've gone round the bend?
Sorry. No more. So we start the film with Alice's previously unseen father musing loudly about how best to exploit the colonies this month, when little Alice emerges sheepishly from the shadows. Where the novel and original Disney film give us a more brazen and fanciful Alice, a little girl who doesn't get why people would want books without pictures in them, who likes to daydream and fantasize, here little Alice is treated as a terrified, sickly girl, afraid that she's going legitimately insane because she keeps thinking about weird things like blue caterpillars. She's comforted with the reassurance that her dad, too, is mad. Sort of a coy avoidance of whether we're dealing with just a metaphor for free thinking or a real inherited mental illness situation, but let's go with it for now. After establishing this, plot twist. The Alice we get for most of this film is actually going to be more than double the age of her usual depiction. A 19-year-old gothy rebel who doesn't want to wear stockings, mum. It's indicated that good old dad has passed away and left her with her dreary mother, dismissive of the nightmares that continue to plague Alice's mind. It turns out they're heading to a dance, and Alice is hurried off to court a lord's son while the mother talks business with what looks like a man styled after the walrus from the Walrus and Carpenter story. There's actually several clear visual parallels between the characters here and who we meet in Wonderland, with Alice suddenly being approached by Rule 63 Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Uh-oh, they spill the beans that this whole party is actually a setup. All of this has been pre-planned, everyone present is fully aware that the day is going to end with Alice and... Hamish? Getting together. Good for her, I guess. Wouldn't want to end up like lonely old Aunt Imogen. Hold for laughter. Alice is swept away by Hamish's mother, who clarifies her greatest fear, ugly grandchildren, and that she's happy pretty little Alice will help her finally get what she wants.
Imbeciles. The gardeners have planted white roses when I specifically asked for red.
I get it. Alice sees the white rabbit and darts off, asking crazy old, lonely old Aunt Imogen if she's seen anything. Weird, lonely Imogen. She still thinks she's waiting for a fiancé. Ha! Aren't old, unwed women sad? Alice continues chasing the rabbit before being swept off and finally made to humour Hamish's proposal. As you might have expected, she can't bring herself to do it. Alice runs off, both to quote-unquote think over Hamish's proposal, but also to chase after the white rabbit that's been eluding her up to this point. She falls down the classic giant hole in a manner a bit more intense than last time around. Hits the ground and dies instantly. Trying to figure her way out of the hole, Alice does the usual drink the thing to make you small, eat the thing to make you big thing to get herself out. No talking doorknob stuff this time, which is actually more faithful to the books, and probably the last time I'll say that sentence in this review.
No use.
She's in Wonderland, but something isn't right. Barely a moment passes before Alice is ambushed by the White Rabbit, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, the Dormouse, the Talking Dodo, and the Talking Flowers, who declare her to be the chosen Alice and scurry her off to Absalom the Wise Blue Caterpillar so he can explain that it's her destiny to slay the dragon and save Wonderland. Okay, again, this stuff isn't bad inherently because it diverts from the source material, be that the novel or Disney film. It's just a new direction to go in, and I can even see where they're going with this. It's, in spirit, the same way that the novel, and to an even greater extent the animated original, attempt to apply a fantastic coat of paint to the very real frustrations of a young girl at the time. Of being spoken down to a la the stuffy blue caterpillar, of being spoken over a la the Hatter's Tea Party, of being educated on matters she feels are detached and arbitrary a la the lecturing mouse. They're trying to do that here, only instead Alice is dealing with the need to take responsibility in an unfair world that expects too much of her. And here the characters are insisting Alice play a role in a dangerous and possibly deadly prophecy. She's being told by the people around her to sacrifice her own comfort and freedom to restore balance to a system Alice isn't even particularly attached to. Except, you know what's so different here? Tim Burton will make the system right. To bring up Joseph Campbell's hero's journey is a bit of a cliche when you're talking about an adventure movie, especially something made to appeal to such a wide family audience. When it comes to this movie, however, it's nearly impossible to not do so. This classic storytelling structure has so utterly consumed what used to very much not be a straightforward heroic journey that it just has to be pointed out as we work through this movie. In case you're unfamiliar, it's the kind of basic beats of storytelling that really anyone who's ever watched Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or any number of popular adventure stories should recognise. A hero usually comes from nothing, realises they have a greater purpose, at first is unsure of themselves, meets one or several mentors, encounters hardship, reaches a low point, then through a fundamental change in character, confronts their enemies and achieves their goals. There's more to it that stories with this structure might go for or reject. Usually the mentor dies at the end of the second act, usually there's some kind of sacred object the hero gets before they can do their thing. The hero might have to struggle in the end about not wanting to return to their previous life. I bring all this up because, again, it's so at odds with how we might fundamentally understand Alice in Wonderland as a story. A story about a young girl making her way, somewhat aimlessly, through a world that to her seems incongruous, nonsensical. Eating a cake turns you into a giant, a baby will randomly transform into a pig, time forever stands still at a tea party because the Mad Hatter annoyed time itself. The animated adaptation somewhat attempted to echo this. For the most part, Alice is still wandering through a series of strange anecdotal events that don't necessarily lead on one to the other. She just sort of stumbles into odd occurrences. You know, like how life is for a child. As I've already mentioned, it seems like in aging up Alice for this movie, they've also dramatically changed this trajectory. Now it's not just about trying to understand an unstructured reality, but being given a clear and predetermined path in life and being forced to take responsibility for it. Now, again, the fact that this is such a departure from the text it's rooted in, not an inherent flaw, since it's obvious from the start that the aim here was not to directly adapt the novels. If they wanted that, Alice wouldn't be 19 for most of the movie. There is a big flaw here, however, and hopefully, as we keep tracking the trajectory of this hero's journey Alice has been thrown in, you'll start to figure it out with me. So despite the pleas of the various animals that Alice has already been here before and is exactly who they needed, Alice rejects the call and insists she isn't the person they think she is. Now, the fact that the film has already spent 10 minutes establishing Alice's previous connection to Wonderland even as a child, she's already met the White Rabbit and the Blue Caterpillar and all that in her dreams, it sort of kills any tension about whether or not she really is the real Alice. We know what's up, even if wide old Sage Caterpillar informs the group that she's not hardly the girl they wanted. Just want to quickly flag up, why do we keep doing this to the Blue Caterpillar? Like, in the original novels, the caterpillar is an asshole and mainly serves as reminiscent of the patronising, self-serious adults Alice deals with in her daily life. He's a narcissist who cares more about lecturing Alice to reinforce his own sense of superiority than to genuinely help her. It actually feels pretty faithful to that, how in the Disney original, he just flies off in a huff because Alice annoyed him, despite her clearly being in need. Yet, we get American McGee's Alice, in which the caterpillar is a wise, beloved leader. We get the Looking Glass Wars novels, in which the caterpillar is a wise, beloved leader. We get the sci-fi miniseries, in which the caterpillar is a wise, beloved leader. And yes, here we get Absalom the Blue Caterpillar, wise and beloved leader. It's just really strange how so consistently this character, who's basically just a stereotypical smarmy aristocrat, becomes a great oracle of truth. This leads into a later point, but moving on for now. While Alice and those around her begin to suspect she isn't the right girl for the job, that doesn't stop the Red Queen's armada from quickly arriving, and Alice and company are forced to scatter as the resistance is rounded up by a patrol, led by the fearsome Bandersnatch. The Dormouse manages to take out the thing's eye, and Alice makes off into the woods. The Knave of Hearts shows up to... Wait, is that Crispin Glover? Yeah, boy! Anyway, he glowers in the middle distance, then returns to the Red Queen to report on goings-on. Ah, the Red Queen. I'll have a lot to say about her, lads. A lot to say about her. Enraged to discover Alice, the girl prophesied to kill her Jabberwocky dragon, is here, she sends the knave off to track her down.
For my wife and pups as well.
Alice meets the copyright trademark Cheshire Cat so he can take her to the copyright trademark tea party and meet the copyright trademark March Hare and Mad Hatter. So, hot off the heels of Captain Jack Sparrow's absurd popularity, I guess it became clear that a character as loud and dominating as the Mad Hatter was a ripe opportunity for another Johnny Depp star performance. So we get this kind of disassociative identity, half creepy dandy, half angry Scot, who serves a much larger role in the story. Where the novel and Disney original process the Hatter's commanding presence as a reflection of Alice's own perspective, these older dudes talking over her, feigning interest in her own situation, shoving her around on their own whims, feigning some pompous understanding of what the hell they're even doing.
But I don't quite understand.
It's very simple. Now, 30 days have set. No. Well, an unbirthday, if you have a birthday, then you... She doesn't know what an unbirthday is.
The Burton Redux decided it meant he's, like, really interesting and endearing. The Mad Hatter gets the full treatment, a backstory, a bit of an arc, character growth. As we go forward, he's basically a secondary main character, and definitely that has nothing to do with the fact that he's probably the most recognisable male character in the series. No, shut up feminazis, shut up feminazis. It's exposited briefly that the Tea Party crew had originally resisted the Red Queen's takeover, and Hatter decides to take off and get her on her way to safety. He puts her on his hat and heads off, and we get a very funny joke from the March Hare.
Should be safe there. Spoon.
As the Hatter sets off and Alice reveals to him that she is neither the chosen one nor intends to kill any dragon, the transactional nature of their relationship is made front and center. He just straight up sticks her on a stump in the middle of the woods and leaves her to die until she reassures him that she will risk her life for him, which... We're gonna get to the part where the film acknowledges how messed up this is, right? Right? As Alice tries to connect with the Hatter and makes amends for brazenly claiming she doesn't want to die to please random people she doesn't know, Hatter reveals how Wonderland got to the state it's in. You see, before, things used to be good. The White Queen was in charge, people were happy, and, danced around in the fields and stuff, and had parties and music, and did things happy people do. And then the Red Queen showed up and burned everything down to destroy the old system and establish her own. It was there they lost the Vorpal Sword, the key to defeating the Jabberwocky. We're still keeping track of that hero's journey, folks? The pair's bonding moment is interrupted by the Knave's fleet, and the Hatter gives himself up to get Alice out of harm's way. Night approaches, as our hero is now alone. I've been gesturing at it for a lot of this video, but I still feel like it's worth highlighting the extent to which, at this point, this is not really Alice's story. Now, about halfway into the film, Alice is still just sort of being dragged around from set piece to set piece, much like in the source material, only now rather than just being about her experiences in these strange encounters. Now absolutely everything is being coloured by the clear, heroic framework that's been layered onto the story. When Alice meets the Tweedles, it's so they can exposition about the prophecy. When she meets the Blue Caterpillar, prophecy exposition. Cheshire Cat, prophecy. Mad Hatter, prophecy. Except watching the hero grow and change and be affected by their experiences is what makes any of this interesting. It isn't just the space roller coaster that makes Luke's journey interesting, it's seeing him transform from a naive kid who dreamed of something more into a more nuanced, mature character who understands the difficulties of the universe around him. Captain America's similar transition from wide-eyed patriot to do-what-it-takes freedom fighter wouldn't be as satisfying if he only got there by being pulled around by others the entire time without making a choice of his own. You know what we're getting here? Space Jam. Alice here is just Michael Jordan being pulled around on a green screen and following the whims of tennis balls on sticks because why not? And again, that isn't in and of itself a failure, it's not even that far off the original material. Alice is being pulled around in an indifferent, confusing world. We empathise because this is how she's pulled around in her real life indifferent, confusing world. Except this film is using that framework to make a real, pointed statement, and it's at this moment in the story that we finally get to see what this is.
Alice, but this is my dream. I'll decide where it goes from here.
If you diverge from the path,
I make the path.
So there we have it. The film just showed off some thematic skin there. Alice taking control of her predestined path. And she demonstrates this by, apparently against the foretold prophecy, going off to save the Mad Hatter instead of going to the White Queen to ready herself to fight the dragon. She made a choice against her predestined path. There's our moral. Now where do we go from here?
forgive me. I allowed her to divert from her destined path.
No. But that is exactly where she will find the fourth sword. We have our champion.
You know how in a video game, a person might say, "Help, please, save my child from that burning building." And you choose to have your character say, "Nah, actually I don't really feel like it." And then it turns out that in fact you have no other path and it gives you the mission anyway. That's what just happened.
Atomic annihilation.
Come back some other time.
Come on, hon. It's just a little paperwork. Let him fill it out, and it's done.
I said no.
And I'm saying yes.
It turns out Alice's decision to go save the Hatter is actually still part of the foretold prophecy. Alice subverted the expectations of others, but the story unsubverted it for her. The moral just got unmoraled. And we start to get a picture of what this story is doing. After accidentally eating some embiggening cake that makes her a wee bit too large, Alice meets the Red Queen. She manages to pass herself off as Lady from Umbridge, hoping to bond over their mutually large heads. The Queen welcomes her with open arms, and she takes the role of behind enemy lines protege in her quest to save the imprisoned Mad Hatter. And I guess all the other people that have been helping her all this time, maybe. But mostly the Hatter. As he goes about making hats for the Queen, she heads over to console him as he starts to flip out wildly in his chains.
Have I gone mad?
But I'll tell you a secret. All the best people are.
So that's a dramatic echo of what Alice's dad said to her as a kid. There is a sensitivity to this scene that I actually appreciated. It really feels like one of the first times we really see Alice's personality as a free thinker acknowledged by the film as the thing that makes her special, rather than an arbitrary prophecy. Sort of a bit uncomfortable how they're framing these inspiring words of going against the status quo as, like, her trying to console someone with clear and legitimate mental issues he should probably get more serious help with, but, you know, sort of did that at the start too. The Hatter suddenly demands that she go and retrieve the Vorpal sword, and despite her just a few minutes ago proclaiming that she's done following orders guided by a dumb prophecy, follows his orders guided by the dumb prophecy. She risks her life getting the blade and even manages to befriend the wretched Bandersnatch because, hey, maybe there's some good in all of us, right? That's a moral of this film, I guess? And makes off to the White Queen, albeit without the Mad Hatter like she'd hoped. The pieces are in place, Alice has her magical item, and we're ready to enter the third act. Alice and the White Queen exchange pleasantries as Anne Hathaway continues to act her goddamned heart out. Meanwhile, the Mad Hatter does the actual plot crucial stuff. That's really not hyperbole. Between him and the Cheshire Cat, they basically conduct an entire mass escape wild uprising thing that sets the stage for the final confrontation. He gets all of our secondary characters freed, the Queen's people begin to turn against her, and they all set off to join Alice as Queenie mobilises what's left of her forces. If we're keeping track, as Alice just begins to do things that are actually, you know, not just her being dragged around by others, She's taken off screen for 10 minutes so the one protagonist dude in the movie can do 90% of the saving the day. Neat! He and Alice have a cheerful reunion and the two enjoy a calm before the storm. Time for the big fight arrives and it has to be decided who'll fight for the White Queen, which is apparently in dispute now, even though everyone up to this point has been pretty declarative that Alice is the only one who can... Yep, check notes again. Yep, still Alice. Good we went over that again. People look to the scrolls, then look awkwardly, expectantly to Alice. Clear visual parallels to the whole Hamish proposal thing, and Alice runs off just as she did before. So, okay. Do we see what's happening here? Do we now see, as the movie begins to round out, exactly where this film so fundamentally missteps? Earlier in this summary, I pointed out that Burton's narrative parallel between Alice being pressured in the real world and pressured in Wonderland is fundamentally flawed for one simple reason: that it makes the system right. Now hopefully, having explained what got us to this point and us now starting to see where this is going, you can start to see where I'm going with this. Because yes, Alice's big grand decision at the end of this story, she does decide to fulfill the prophecy. The moral of Alice in Wonderland, or at least in this part of the story, is that the right thing to do is to accept responsibility and sacrifice yourself to whatever the whims are of the prior established order. To which you might say, wait a second, but this isn't the established order. The White Queen and all her allies, the Hatter and the Rabbit and everyone else, they're the island of forgotten toys, a ragtag team of rejected misfits. Nope. Remember earlier? Remember when the Mad Hatter explained the backstory about how the White Queen used to rule the land and everyone lived in conflict-free comfort? The White Queen wasn't the reject who upturned society in favour of what she saw as a better, fairer world. That was the Red Queen, the villain of this movie. There's a reason I've been avoiding talking directly about the Red or the White Queen up to this point, and it's so that I can make this argument now that we're seeing where this movie is choosing to lead us. No two characters so clearly demonstrate the monumental missteps in the execution of this story. As I've said before, I'm not here to be that review dude, here to lazily point out that these characters are bad because they don't line up to anything really resembling the original story. That the Red Queen, just as with the animated original, is actually a weird mishmash of several different vaguely antagonistic characters, while the White Queen, who wasn't even in the original novel, is herself out of character on many an occasion. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that this movie seems to be convinced that these characters represent the opposite of what they actually represent in the context of this narrative. This movie thinks that the Red Queen is the domineering matriarch, aristocratic old blood who represents the system, while the White Queen is Alice, free-spirited resistance to an unfair society. Nope, that's the Red Queen. Okay, yeah, I know that I'm ignoring all the ways this film goes out of its way to make the Red Queen painfully and transparently evil, yelling off with their heads at the slightest inconvenience and basically being as ruthless as she can be in pursuit of her goals. In fact, even the cast seems obsessed with the idea that there couldn't possibly be a redeeming quality or element of depth in the character of the Red Queen.
With the White Queen, I felt like there was a little bit, maybe a hint of that, she could have a little bit of a dark side. Do you think that there's a little bit, kind of going both ways on that?
No. Sorry, I'm very obliging because I'm very, very bad. I've got problems.
But I'd like to take you all back to the far-off time of February 2018 and the release of a beloved film with a villain who I feel, at least in spirit, the Red Queen could have followed a similar framework of, which may have led to a far more coherent narrative. A villain who seemed, on face value, as a sociopathic bad, but actually presented not only a legitimate parallel to the protagonist's position, but also, as we grow to learn more about them, winds up coming from an uncomfortably sympathetic perspective. Killmonger, the villain to Black Panther in Black Panther. In case you're unfamiliar, Black Panther sees King T'Challa rule the highly advanced but isolated nation of Wakanda, forced to grapple with blood relative Eric Killmonger. Killmonger, an orphan from the US, was abandoned by his nation after his father decided it was time to share Wakanda's weapons to underprivileged groups in outside communities. As we learn more about Eric and his plight, we realise, wait a second, this guy kind of has a point, and in many ways we discover that the moral message the film broadly wants to convey, that we should help our fellow man if we have the opportunity to, comes not from our heroic king, but from him, the villain. The Red Queen could have been this, and it would have been a message far more consistent with what Alice in Wonderland wants to moralise on. What this film wants is to tell the little girls out there to dare to dream, to follow their own path, to uproot the system and damn the majority if that's what it takes to make a positive change. From the perspective of the aristocratic public, of Alice's mother and Hamish and everyone else in that party, that's what Alice is doing. She's rejecting the done thing. She's acting unruly. She's acting out, ruining potential business relations. She's destroying everything. To them, they are living in relative contentment, and she seems, as most independent women at the time would seem, to be the villain of their story. In their narrow minds, nobody wins from what Alice wants to do except Alice. She's a reject, a freak, like weird lonely old Aunt Imogen, but even worse because on top of everything, she's acting out instead of just being weird in the corner. And again, it's not fan theory or even subtext that the White Queen and her prophecy is the clear parallel with the aristocrats and their oppressive structure. It's very much text, as Alice is forced to deal with the exact same pressure with the same wording and the same presentation. Alice does what they want her to do. She dons her armour, takes her sword, and sacrifices her own personal freedom to follow a prophecy set out for her. She fights a dragon for them and helps win a war for them. The Red Queen, for as much as the film tries desperately to paint over it, remains a representation of independence and doing what's right for you, even if others reject you. And the worst part? Much of what we focus on to reject the Red Queen is pretty shitty.
We follow you no more, bloody big head.
Yep, you revealed my true intent. This was all pro-big forehead propaganda. But, you know what? Sue me. Because I'm gonna say it. You can't stop me. Here it is. Yes, some of us have big goddamn foreheads, and by God it's hard. There are hairstyles I just can't have because of this big old forehead. You know how many pictures I've deleted on my phone because of this forehead? And if you try and take pictures of me on my behalf, you better believe I'm untagging myself from that shit. Seemingly, however, Tim Burton has something against our kind, because despite throwing in as much as he can to ensure the Red Queen is the most caricatured version of a villain, it's her big forehead that keeps getting referred to. Bloody Big Head, as she's referred to by everyone around her.
Down with the bloody big head.
Down with bloody big head. No more, bloody big head.
One unfortunate head the Hatter sighs on meeting face to face. Even in an interview talking about her character, the first thing Helena Bonham Carter had to say was, the key thing about the Red Queen was her huge oversized head. We see you, Helena. We can see you're one of us. Why are you doing this? The people around Red Queen are forced to wear uglifying props because she's so damn self-conscious about her big forehead. And you know what the White Queen has the gall to say when Alice meets her?
How does she seem to you? Perfectly horrid. And her.
Fuck you. Imagine your sibling was born with a facial deformity that they were incredibly self-conscious about. A friend met them, and then the first thing you said to that friend was, "Oh, you met her. Did you see that thing on her face? Did you see that gross shit on her face? Yeah, sad, isn't it? I think that's why she sucks." And you just know this is how the White Queen talks about her in private. It's even a joke halfway through the film how she got preferential treatment because of her comparative traditional good looks. Stressing the importance of good-looking children, where'd I hear that before?
Ugly grandchildren.
Red Queen exists outside of the norms of society, specifically norms in terms of what men view as attractive traits, and has been discriminated against her whole life because of it. While her sister has always been exactly what the monarchy and the public always wanted her to be. Yet somehow she, the traditionally attractive, docile symbol of the old order, is the only one who the film shows any degree of sympathy, even though the clear moral is to be free and say no to the system. She is the system. In France, she'd be guillotined. Again, yes, I get it. They clearly go out of their way to make the White Queen really nice and the Red Queen really, really nasty. But that's for the most part presentation. That's stuff they threw in, like painting white roses red, to cover up the obvious logical progression of their film. There's a version of this film where, after Alice is taken in by the Red Queen as a protege,
anyone with a head that large is welcome in my court.
We discover so much that's been gossiped about her has been deliberately inflated to cast her position in doubt. That, yes, she's hard around the edges, but actually many of her negative traits have been overblown by her sister in a desperate attempt to stir up greater conflict and restore the previous order. You know, like how Alice clearly would have been gossiped about like she was some loony weirdo simply by nature of her stepping outside of the status quo. I call forth the campaign, #Team Red Queen, because this is a narrative that deserves more than, ugh, gross, let's kill the ugly weirdo and put the old queen back in charge. Oh wait, no, not kill her. The White Queen is too nice to do that, so she'll just banish her to live in total isolation from society for the rest of her life. Just had someone try to kill her right in front of you? Who cares that someone just tried to stab your sister in the face? Take her away, boys, with the guy that tried to stab her. That Alice fulfills the prophecy she was handed at the start as a direct parallel to her struggles fulfilling the plans her family has for her in life, sets the precedent that the moral of this story is, take responsibility, do what society tells you to do, don't step out of line. Oh, so she needed to kill the dragon to get back home then? So, like, she did have to fulfill the prophecy anyway? Of course, once we do return to the real world, the film can't actually follow up on this. This is why I say the film fails in a more clear-cut manner than just me not enjoying what it has to say. It might not be called a flaw in and of itself for a family film's moral to be, just do what aristocratic society tells you to do, fulfill your fated prophecy. Even if I obviously disagree with that. But even the film can't hold true to that. Despite spending nearly the last 2 hours showing Alice choosing to do the right thing and follow a predestined path to establish the peaceful old order, we still get the girl power row row fuck the system ending anyway. Note, empowering in the context of a privileged upperclassman taking up the family business of exploiting underdeveloped nations in the colonial era. She goes into business with the walrus guy and the walrus guy? The guy made to look like the walrus from the Walrus and Carpenter story? The fake businessman who tricked a bunch of infant oysters into getting eaten? The fuck? So she says no to the proposal and goes against what everyone except her wants and had planned out for her. In stark contrast to the Wonderland story, as if we just realized 10 minutes from the end that, oh shit, we just made our movie propaganda for the oppressive anti-feminist bourgeois elites of the 18th century. Quick, make it empowering at the end so they won't notice. Well, I did notice, movie. I noticed that you took a story from the perspective of a young girl dealing with people constantly looking to belittle or discard her, putting us in her shoes as she wanders confused through a society she doesn't recognize and that doesn't recognize her, and mangled it into a hero's journey. A male gaze fulfill the prophecy story that does everything it can to remove us from Alice's agency and moralize that we should ultimately do what people tell us to do. With bonus points for the random insertion of male leads to play more substantial roles. But wait, forget the moral, because at the end, even we don't agree with what we're peddling. And I can't think of a bigger failure, because even if you go out and decide to make ice cream that tastes like shit, the worst thing you can do is get right to the end and say, oh no, this tastes like shit. Well, we better put sprinkles on it and hope they won't notice. You took a bad story, and you didn't even commit to it. Well, at least on the bright side, not everything went wrong. You had some weird tension between her and the more than double her age Mad Hatter, but at least you didn't plan on following through with it with some weird kind of gross romantic... Oh, Jesus Christ.
Oh, and one more thing.
Now, in terms of components, I get why this film did well, and in terms of those components, I actually think there's a lot of stuff this movie does do well. This film got the Oscar for Best Art Direction as well as Costume Design, on top of a nomination for Visual Effects, which, to be honest, I'd give it over Inception if not for the cool city-bending bit. For a film made almost entirely out of CG, it's aging pretty nicely, and I think that aforementioned art direction really carries a lot of the film's strengths. The directing is also, for the most part, pretty interesting. A lot of neat shot compositions and not too much of that mid-length shot reverse shot that always bugs the hell out of me. Music is also roundly superb. They establish a ton of catchy motifs, both original and based on the 1951 movie, making sure to remix and call back to them at key points. Even the stuff I don't enjoy as much in those terms, such as the more gothy look to some of the imagery, I get. Both gritty reboots and Tim Burton in general were greatly in demand at the time. I can give it all of this, but that doesn't change my belief that Alice in Wonderland fundamentally misunderstands not only what its source material was trying to say, but what it itself is trying to say as a text diverting from the source material. It takes an abstract, vaguely feminist narrative, attempts to convert that into a structured, overtly feminist one, and instead comes out with a kind of structured anti-feminist mess. Not all bad, as I've just said, but bad in all the most fundamental ways. Tim Burton didn't just take a story for little girls and make it for himself. He made one against little girls, and any other kid who rejects the mockery and belittling of society. For all the red paint, it's still not a red rose. I hope I've made sense here. I realise I may have gone more tangential here than in previous videos. Just seeing this, I just had a lot to say. Please let me know where you agree, where you disagree, and your thoughts in general down below. You can also reach me at @LackingSaint on Twitter, where you'll be able to keep up with what I'm up to and get in touch more easily. This week I have to give the hugest of huge thanks to new patron Letier, who will be getting the secret word next video, and then my other patrons, Alba, Alex Wenberg, Kristen Rawes, Michael Q. Warnock, Nick Schwert, Owen Mateson, Peter Coffin, and Vaisha Giles. If you want to join them and get exclusive updates and more bonuses, or just want to support the work I do, please chip in with $1 or $2 if you can spare. If not, sharing this around on places like Reddit and Twitter really does help a lot. Other than that, thanks for watching, love you all, and catch you next time. At least they gave up after this movie, like just a one and done deal, not like a sequel. Oh no!